Americans deserve to become first-time homebuyers. President Trump has created the best economy in the world. The one thing that would make it better is lower interest rates.
We should have the lowest interest rate of any country, and we don't. We should have. Every point is worth $365 billion.
Welcome back to Real Estate Mindset. Today's video is going to be absolutely bonker as mortgage rates start to collapse. And what we're going to do today, guys, is we're going to look at historically what happened during the last three recessions, not counting lockdowns, during the Federal Reserve's rate cut campaign. So we're going to look at residential mortgage rates and we're going to look at unemployment. And then after that, we're going to go into inflation as PPI came out today, elevated. So we're going to remind you guys by looking at several charts just how bad inflation really is for each and every American. It's a hidden tax. It's a wealth transfer. It is stealing our money. So we have plenty of charts to go over. We're also going to listen to President Ronald Reagan and President Johnson. But before I begin, Mitch Vexler, quick question for you, sir. What are you more worried about, the Federal Reserve and the government's deficit of $37 trillion or the $500 to $600 trillion derivatives market?
The answer from my perspective would be it doesn't matter because neither one of them are going to get paid off using what we currently know as US dollars. So things are going to happen. The US debt could be somewhat manageable if they removed major chunks of it, like the $5.1 trillion in outstanding fraudulent school district bond debt. The derivatives, on the other hand, that's going to take a lot more work, believe it or not, because it's that much bigger. So, like I said, neither one are going to get paid off of what we currently know as this current system.
Yeah, 37 trillion versus 500 trillion from bankers. I would still say, though, Mitch, that the bigger issue is the Federal Reserve because they're the root of the problem. Now, let's start by showing the viewers where we're at with mortgage rates. As of the end of today, the 14th Thursday, the 10-year Treasury, which closely tracks residential mortgage rates, is actually up nearly 5 basis points to 4.29%. But the real story here, and I was watching this, we almost went under, look at this, guys, we almost went under 4.2. Look at that. Look how close we were to being under 4.2. The market reversed because PPI inflation came out, and that sent the 10-year back up. FHA mortgage not quite under 6%. Unless you have good credit and unless you're shopping your loan, then obviously you guys can probably get under 6% for FHA, but right now it's sitting at 6.13%. PPI came out hot. The market is still anticipating a quarter basis point cut, a rate cut from the federal funds rate come September. Now, what I want to show you guys is these three charts, and I'm going to be looking at the last three recessions, not counting the lockdown recession, which is the recession around 1989, the dot-com bubble in the year of 2000, and the global financial crisis. Now, the reason why this is so important is because so many people have a preconceived notion that as soon as the federal funds rate starts going down, that residential mortgage rates are going to start going down, which is far from the truth. They'll cut the federal funds rate to help the banks, not mom and pop. So here's the federal funds rate up here. Now, what I first want to point out is they cut rates and then we go in recession. When we look back here, you guys see this downward arrow. That downward arrow, this red arrow right here, represents the rate cut campaign. So the first one we're looking at started May 1989, and the federal funds rate, not residential mortgages, was at 9.81%. That campaign continued till about December of 1992, where the federal funds rate went all the way down to 2.92%. That represents 689 basis points. And remember, 689 basis points equals 6.89%. So during that time period, you guys, 689 basis point decline. Now, when we fast forward and we look at the dot-com bubble recession, the federal funds rate campaign cut started around December 2000, where the federal funds rate was 6.4%. Now that continued to around July of 2003, dropping the federal funds rate almost under 1% to 1.01%. Now from top to bottom, that equals 539 basis points. I'm going to show you guys in a minute here why that's so important to understand. Now, when we look at the global financial crisis, the rate cut campaign for the federal funds rate started in July, around July of 2007, when the federal funds rate was 5.26%. Now, that rate cut campaign lasted till about January of 2009, taking the federal funds rate to almost zero, to 0.15%. So I want you guys to remember that, because now I'm going to go down here and we're going to look at the 30-year fixed rate mortgage. So these red arrows right here, you can see the diagonal arrows. That is the time frame when the active rate cut campaign was initiated. So when we look at the 30-year fixed rate mortgage from May 1989 to December of 1992, interest rates, residential mortgage rates went from 10.93% to 8.23%. That equals a total drop for you and I, for mom and pop, of 270 basis points, meaning that the lenders and the banks absorbed an additional yield of 419 basis points. Where did that money go? It went right into their pockets. So remember that. And when we look and fast forward to the dot-com bubble, and we look at the period of time, again, this is represented in the red arrow, from December 2000 to July of 2003, interest rates, residential mortgage rates, went from 7.65% down to 5.4%, which represents a change of 224 basis points, which means we have missing, or the lenders took, 350 basis points, and they put that right in their pockets. They did not give that to mom and pop. But the biggest atrocity is when we fast forward to the global financial crisis. And remember, the federal funds rate got to 0.15%, but for us, it only dropped to 5.12%. Regardless, during this time period of July 2007 to January of 2009, residential mortgage rates went from 6.63% down to 5.12%, representing only 151 basis point change, whereas the lenders absorbed another 360 basis points and put that right in their pocket. In fact, I drew a line right here that says MBS, because the rates were so low for so long that the federal funds rate going down didn't help. Rates weren't going down, so they had to start purchasing mortgage-backed securities to continue to artificially lower interest rates. Now, when we go over here to the right and we look at the unemployment traditionally goes up, and it goes up a lot during the rate cut campaign. So just like the other two charts, that red arrow right there represents the rate cut campaign, that time period. And what you guys are looking at right now is the unemployment rate, or U3 unemployment rate. And when we look at the first one here, from May of 1989 to December of 1992, unemployment went from 5.2% and jumped up again during the rate cut campaign to 7.4%, marking an increase in unemployment of 2.2%. When we fast forward to the year of 2000 and we look at December 2000 to July of 2003, the unemployment rate went from 3.9% to 6.2%, which represents an increase in unemployment of 2.3%. Now, when we go over here and look at the global financial crisis back in July of 2007, again, the rate cut campaign before the recession started, unemployment was 4.7%. And then when we look at January of 2009, unemployment went all the way up to 7.8%, representing an increase of 3.1%. And remember, you guys, the unemployment kept going up after the recession. And it's after the recession because the banks were okay by then. Because remember, you guys, it's not about you and I. The Federal Reserve is about backstopping banks. So, Mitch, I guess technically we've already started the rate cut campaign, because the Federal Reserve, they didn't just cut a quarter, they cut 50 basis points last year before the election for some reason, and then they haven't cut it since. But many people think it's going to start again in September. And what I'd like, if you can, Mitch, can you articulate what you believe is going to happen in 2025 as the Federal Reserve starts and continues a rate cut campaign? What are we going to see?
The Federal Reserve has multiple levers that they can pull, some of which are just absolutely repugnant, but they do have the levers and they can do it. The problem is there's always the law of unintended consequences. So with regard to the 4.2% that they're claiming unemployment today, in terms of hard numbers, just so we can put a real number to it, that's roughly 7.2 million people. So if you think about the size of your city, wherever you live, and then figure, okay, if I live in a population of 200,000, look at how many times larger that 7.2 million is. If you live in a city like Dallas, that's more than the people living in Dallas, as an example. That's a lot of people. So what the Federal Reserve will do is they'll start saying, okay, we'll lower interest rates if employment starts going up. But the circular argument is that if they lower interest rates, it doesn't necessarily mean that mom and pop benefit by those lower interest rates. So who is the largest beneficiary of those lower interest rates? Well, that is the federal government in and of itself, because their cost of interest, Fed funds, goes lower. So every 100 basis point drop is the equivalent, give or take, of roughly 500 billion in interest savings. Well, that's good from the standpoint of the US national debt because it slows it down. It's not so good from the standpoint of mom and pop. Now they'll say, well, we lower interest rates, mom and pop will be able to go out and buy more housing. Yeah, no, that won't work. And we've already proven that mathematically. You could drop it 200 basis points, and given the inflation, you're not going to move the needle that much. You'll move it, but not much.
Yeah, and that's what I was going to ask you. So we saw during the global financial crisis, Ben Bernanke created mortgage-backed securities, or he was the face that created mortgage-backed securities. So honestly, and the Federal Reserve is already doing quantitative easing and manipulating residential mortgage rates by doing purchasing of the 10-year Treasury. Because obviously, guys, remember when they purchase, the rate goes down. When they sell, the rate goes up. So, Mitch, would you agree that, just like you said, if they lower the federal funds rate, say to 300 basis points, mom and pop may only see 75 basis point, 100 basis point decrease in the 30-year fixed rate mortgage. And it's possible that the only way that residential mortgage rates go down is either mortgage-backed security purchasing or more quantitative easing, where the Fed or Treasury purchases 10-year treasuries. Would you agree that it's going to take more than the federal funds rate going down to ever see residential mortgage rates, say, in the 3% again?
Yes, it's going to take the slashing of outstanding fraudulent bond debt from both of the largest purveyors of the bond debt on the planet, which is the Federal Reserve and the central appraisal districts, right? The school districts that use the bond money based on the tax money that's raised, they're going to have to do wholesale dismantling and wholesale bankruptcies of the fraudulent bonds, because that is how you move the needle. And the point being that if you're a commercial bank, you're not going to loan just because the rates dropped a quarter basis point. You as a commercial bank, given the risk, if they go ahead and say, well, we're going to do something else, we're going to pull this lever over here, that adds risk to the market. If you add risk to the market, you cause the interest rates to people like you and me, mom and pop, to go up, not down. It is the rule of unintended consequences. And that's why I said when the Federal Reserve pulls the wrong lever, that's why it becomes repugnant. They refuse to look at the outside circumstances of who it's really playing for. If you're playing for the federal government and say, okay, this is one method, that's great. What are you going to do to put a floor underneath mom and pop? Because once that number starts kicking in, you go 7.2 million, 8.2 million. What are you going to do if it doubles up? 15 million. See the problem? The risk in the marketplace increases. Mom and pop don't have the money now because 37% of the outstanding households, give or take, don't have the money to pay down any debt, because in reality, 11, 12% of their gross income, median household income, is going to pay for the real estate taxes. If they don't have the money, you can't get blood out of a stone. This is why we keep pounding the table. You're at the end game. You can try and lie your way out of it, but unless you do wholesale bankruptcies of these outstanding fraudulent bonds, you will not move the needle. And the law of unintended consequences are you will push the unemployment way beyond where it is right now.
I hope everyone just understood what you just said. I mean, that's several steps ahead of what almost all people are saying on mainstream media. I appreciate that. Now, to the viewers, as we transition out of mortgages and into inflation, I want to first play a video from President Johnson, who spoke in 1965 about the housing market and defeating the enemy.
We have the resources in this country. We have the ingenuity. We have the courage and we have the compassion, and we must, in this decade, bring all of these strengths to bear effectively so that we can lift off the conscience of our affluent nation the shame of slums and squalor and the blight of deterioration and decay. We must make sure that every family in America lives in a home of dignity, in a neighborhood of pride, and a community of opportunity, and a city of promise and hope. And this legislation represents the single most important breakthrough in the last 40 years. Only the Housing Act of 1949 approaches the significance of this measure. And years to come, I believe this act will become known as the single most valuable housing legislation in our history. The Housing and Urban Development Act of 1965 retains and expands and improves the best of the tested programs of the past. It extends and gives new thrust to the FHA mortgage insurance program so that millions of Americans can come toward attainment of new homes in the future, as millions already have under that program in the past. It opens the way for more orderly and cohesive development of all of our suburbs. And it opens the doors to thousands of our veterans who have been unable to obtain the benefits of a federal housing program. It extends and enlarges and improves the urban renewal program so that we can more effectively challenge and defeat the enemy of decay.
I wonder if he understands that the enemy is really propaganda and inflation. Let me show you something. Starting with PPI, wholesale, and this came out today, you guys, right before we started recording. Wholesale prices rose 0.9% in July. That's much more than is expected. The producer price index jumped 0.9% in July compared with the Dow Jones estimate of only 0.2% gain. It was the biggest monthly increase since June of 2022, or more than 3 years earlier. I don't think inflation is going away, unfortunately, y'all. This is a huge issue. Following the release, the market implied odds of a September rate cut decreased, but only slightly, according to the CME Group's FedWatch tool, which we just went over. I also want you guys to understand how much the Federal Reserve has stolen from us through inflation since the year of 2019. Now, the average income right now, household income, whether it's adjusted, it doesn't make sense, but according to Fred, whether it's adjusted for inflation or not, which is so crazy to me, is $80,000. How can real and nominal income be the same? But when I put $80,000 back in 2019, you guys see that we should be making, instead of $80,000, we should be making $101,087. That is a cumulative rate of inflation of 26.4%. So they have robbed us in just 5 years, 5 or 6 years, of 26.4% of our income by debasing and devaluing the dollar. And just real quick, I wanted to show you where the demand was for mortgages. I forgot to cover that in the last segment, but here's the top mortgage lenders in Nevada for 2024. And I wanted you guys, again, to understand, if you want to see where the price declines for homes are starting, follow new builds, those clusters of new build communities. Look at the number 4, 5th, 6th, and 7th largest mortgage lenders in Nevada. Lennar Mortgage, DHI Mortgage, DHI is a building company, KBHS Home Loans, Pulte Mortgage, these are all new home builders. So follow the new construction if you want to follow the turmoil. This chart represents the estimated percentage of 30-year-olds that are both married and homeowners. And what I've done here is I've separated this out into 2 time periods, from 1960 to 1990, which is a 30-year time period, and then from 1990 to which is another 30-year time period, because I'm showing you guys the acceleration of debauchery. So when we look here again, it started out, okay, first of all, the last time that this went up was from 1950 to 1960, okay? So 30-something-year-olds that were also homeowners and married was over 50%. But from 1960 to 1990, which is right here, it went from 52% to 44%, representing a change, and this is not good, of 8%. And I'm going to show you guys the inverse of this chart here in a second, and why kids can no longer afford to be married and homeowners. You just can't afford to do that. But look at how much this accelerates the next 30 years from 1990 to 2020. Okay, so the homeownership and married rate goes from 44% all the way down to 15%. That represents a decline. And this is really crazy if you think about it, of 2/3 roughly, or 29%. And when we go past 2020, I mean, look at this, guys. I don't even know if it's 10% anymore. This is an absolute atrocity. This is absolute debauchery. But let me show you guys the inverse of this and why this is happening. The U.S. national debt is skyrocketing upward. And again, when we look at the time period from 1960 to 1990, there was a more gradual increase of national debt. In 1960, the national debt was 3.05 trillion. I mean, we printed that in the last 2 years. And then in 1990, that went up 4.64 trillion to 7.69 trillion. But again, look at the massive acceleration. This is what I'm trying to point out here, okay? Look at the massive acceleration from 1990 to 2020 in U.S. national debt. It went up 24.98 trillion. You're looking at the inverse of what we just showed you. On top of that, I'm showing you guys as well that the only people that are benefiting from this is the top 1%. Now, first of all, we are, okay, the bottom 50% is that green line right there. So the green line has no growth whatsoever. You guys see that? No growth whatsoever. Now, what I wanted to do is, you see I'm circling, first of all, that's 1990 right there, but to the right of 1990, you see that little red line right there? That little red line that I'm circling right there is the gap between the top 1%, which is the gold line skyrocketing upward, and the bottom 50%. So that's still a gap, right? See that gap right there? But let's fast forward again from 1990 to 2020, and look at this red line right here. It actually went to 2025. Look at the gap. I mean, the gap is out of control, you guys. What is it? 4 times worse right now in a period of 30 years. You guys, unfortunately, the rich just get richer. Mitch, after you answer this question, I'm going to pull up the default rates for consumer debt. But before I do that, you see the gap, you see the inflation, you see the debt, you see the lack of quality care from our politicians, and it's super, super sad. If we keep heading this direction, and I know things are going to implode, they're already imploding into each other, but I'm worried that most mom and pops aren't going to see what's coming. They know something's wrong, they can't articulate it, and therefore they can't prepare. Are we being forced into becoming a nation of renters? Why or why not?
Boomers have had the wind at their back for 40 years because the interest rates, if you go back 40 years ago, were give or take around 18%. Those interest rates have been coming down. However, now, today, by several years, due to inflation, they're being forced to give back that built up equity that they got from the amortization schedule being paid down. Now, if you're a buyer in today's world, you have the exact opposite happening, where you have so many things coming at you that home affordability just is not affordable. Inflation, that's out of control. It's expensive. It has been out of control. The real estate taxes are absolutely out of control to the point of 7 to 12% of the median household income, making the ability for a younger family, which is what you just saw on that chart, making that extremely difficult, if not impossible, for them to be able to buy a house. Therefore, they have no choice but to be renters. The U.S. national debt, in addition to what you're talking about here, the compound interest calculator that's on my website is going up. And that's exactly the problem. The U.S. national debt and the compound interest on the outstanding fraudulent school district bond debt are going up at the exact same pace. This is happening. This is real. Then you have to say, who gets the benefit of it? Well, obviously, those who loaned the money are getting the benefit. Mom and pop are getting destroyed. So President Trump is focused on what I would call top line revenue, which is fine. Good. However, simultaneously, what they need to be doing is shoring up the balance sheet of mom and pop, because mom and pop is the US economy. And in order to shore up the balance sheet, A, repeal the real estate tax, because then the amortization schedule that they get is 100% in their favor. They own the land beneath their asset. B, lowering the expenses. What are the expenses? The outstanding fraudulent school district bond debt. Put the school districts into bankruptcy, wipe out the 5.1 trillion in bonds, and all the bonds, in reality, if you think this through all of it, the way, Freddie Mac and Fannie Mae are sitting on Lord knows how many hundreds of billions, if not trillions of dollars worth of bond debt. The truth of the matter is what's backing it is at a minimum 40 cents less on the dollar, a minimum, because we've proven mathematically that the average house that's available in the market today, its true value is at a minimum 40 cents less. It goes all the way through to Freddie Mac and Fannie Mae. Wipe the fraud out of the system, restore the credibility. So that gets you the bottom line, right? That saves the money. That has to be done simultaneously while President Trump is focused on the top line. Now you've got a way to save the system. If you don't, it will blow up. If you don't, the unemployment is extraordinarily likely. It'll end up well past 18%. That's what's going to happen because nobody can afford the debt. And by the way, that includes corporations. So the corporations are in the same boat as mom and pop. If you're a tenant in a retail building, you're in the exact same boat. Everybody's getting slapped by this. It doesn't matter if you have a salary of 80,000 or if you're a billionaire. You got real estate, you're getting slapped. You don't own the land beneath your feet, and that money is being transferred from your pocket into that of the lenders, regardless of who owns the lenders. They're getting the benefit. So it's important that everybody on my website go and look at that compound interest calculator, because what Travis just showed you is exactly when the US national debt's going like this, so is the compound interest calculator. One is at the federal side, the other one is at the local side with regard to your school districts. They're tied at the hip.
Yes. 100%. And I hope you guys see that by now. I mean, we've been talking about it and showing you so many charts over the last 10 months. For me, it's now crystal clear. I see how everything is, tied up and wound together, and how essentially a lot of these things are just tentacles or political subdivisions, really, of the Federal Reserve. Now, speaking of lenders, let me show you where we're at with consumer defaults. What we're looking at here is percent of balances that are 90 days plus past due by loan type. And this is looking at credit cards, student loans, auto loans, mortgages, and HELOCs, which is a second mortgage. Now, what I've done, you guys, is you see this little blue circle right there? See that little blue circle? You see this little red circle and that little green circle right there? That's what we were at as far as a default rate heading into the global financial crisis, which means right now credit card defaults as far as delinquencies 90 days or more past due is well elevated past where we were going into the global financial crisis. Again, here's the blue line. That's where we're at as far as default rate, global financial crisis. It's elevated above that. Now, the same thing is true when we look at student loans, and look at the trajectory of student loans. My God, that's straight up. That's parabolic. But this is where we're at going into the global financial crisis. Obviously, we're much higher than that right now. Now, as far as auto loans, the same thing with auto loans. This green circle right here is where we're at in the global financial crisis. So we're over that. So we're over the delinquency and default rate for those three categories of loans. When we look at the purple line and we look at the yellow line, this is below, and this is mortgages and HELOCs. This is well below where we were at right before the global financial crisis. When we go back a little ways to 2006, it's almost exactly the same. But again, right before, and that's this right here, that's this line right here, right before the global financial crisis, it's lower. But what I want to point out is we couldn't measure, and you see right here, loan modifications. We didn't measure loan modifications during the global financial crisis, which means we have way more, millions more loan modified mortgages than we did compared to the global financial crisis, because that didn't really exist prior to the global financial crisis. So I really want you guys to think about that, because loan modifications are not in this delinquency rate. Before my closing question to Mitch, let's listen to Ronald Reagan talk about banks and the IMF.
This decade in particular has tested the mettle and demonstrated the strength and merit of the World Bank and IMF. The international political and economic institutions created after 1945 rested upon a belief that the key to national development and human progress is individual freedom, both political and economic. The Bretton Woods institutions and the GATT established generalized rules and procedures to facilitate individual enterprise and an open international trading and financial system. They recognized that economic incentives and increasing commercial opportunities would be essential to economic recovery and growth. We who live in free market societies believe that growth, prosperity, and ultimately human fulfillment are created from the bottom up, not the government down. Only when the human spirit is allowed to invent and create, only when individuals are given a personal stake in deciding economic policies and benefiting from their success, only then can societies remain economically alive, dynamic, prosperous, progressive, and free.
Mitch, I will say, what a speech. What a speech from Reagan. And he said many good things, but as we just went over, going back to 1960, taking a look at 3 recessions, none of what Johnson or Reagan said came to fruition. The capitalists came in, absolutely destroyed us by leveraging up our homes and really our lives and our ability to pay taxes. Let's not forget that, right? They're in debt with the implicit guarantee of the taxpayer. You know, Trump says the implicit guarantee of the government, but we're the government. So it's the implicit guarantee of us as well. But Mitch, my question to you is who was the last president who really helped the housing market? Not just used it as propaganda, not just used it to get popular for clout, but really, really helped the housing market. Who was the last president that did that, and how did they do that? What do you think?
In reality, none of them, right? It's math. People talk, but they don't quite understand what they're talking about. If you've got the benefit of a balance sheet, you're able to build equity if the amortization schedule is in your favor. Right now, due to the inflation and the real estate tax, the amortization schedule is not in your favor. And to that point, my website's mockingbirdproperties.com/DCAD. And although Travis and I have been extraordinarily busy for the last 10 days, this has been an out-and-out whirlwind. I want to point out that on my website, there's a section called articles, and the entirety of that website is searchable. So if you search for the word articles, what has been created literally in the last 10 days is The Game, AKA Your Life is Rigged. There's a whole section now that we've created by Thomas Paine. And Thomas Paine is a very interesting character over 250 years ago. And many of these speeches that you've seen from Reagan are a direct descendant of what Thomas Paine wrote to George Washington. It was George Washington who helped create the US Constitution. Thomas Paine's writings are all through there. So we've put an entire section together because it's so fascinating to see how he wrote, what he wrote. And the truth is, there's probably no better human on the planet that has been this clairvoyant as to what was coming based on past history. And as I've said, those who don't study the history are doomed to repeat it. So over and above all that, the history of uniform and equal, I put that together because Travis and I believe, are going to be with the FBI shortly. But that uniform and equal is extraordinarily important under the US Constitution, which under the rule of law, it's called equality. Equality of the law for those that are participating in the law. Extraordinarily important. That will end up getting presented to the FBI. Public debt, as distinct from corporate debt, the data is cooked in the black letter of the law. The articles and the discussions section of that page are being updated by the day as information is coming forward. And Travis and I both have information that's coming. I'm working on it as fast as I can to get prepared for the FBI, because I was told I have to make it as clear as humanly possible, and I'm working on it. But nonetheless, these documents are updated daily, and it's important because even though we haven't spoken about them, it's important for people to go and read this and truly understand what's going on. And as soon as I can get it to the point where it's super clear, we're going to post that as well.
And do us a favor, if you want to learn what's going on, because it starts with batting down apathy and figuring out what's going on. You just saw the amount of work that Mitch put in. If you don't want that, you can go to Real Estate Mindset. I have video trainings and courses on a lot of similar matters. Everything is for free. So learn what's going on so that you can help us take back our country and take back our civil rights. It's really, really important that you guys hear what we're saying. So go to our websites, sign up, sign the petition. We have so much more coming. And also don't forget, on my website, I made a whole new page on the assault and battery from the Central Appraisal District, the chairman. I mean, this stuff is really happening, you guys. And I'm going to tell you right now, we 100% need your help. We cannot do this without you. Just one person that's watching this, just one person, just you. If you literally reach out right now and to help us, it's going to make a difference. That's where we're at in the society. Each and every one of us can make a profound difference. And it starts with educating yourself. Now, hopefully we helped you. Let us know how we did on this video. Let us know whether or not you liked it. And if you're out there investing in real estate, your life's just trying to figure things out, you guys already know we wish you luck. And we hope you win.